My name is Pauline Green and I'm President of the International Cooperative Alliance. I'm really sorry that today I can't join you in person at your meeting, but as you know, we have our General Assembly for the International Cooperative Alliance in Cape Town this week, a huge meeting with nearly 2,000 delegates, and of course the President needs to be there to chair the movement. So I'm talking to you in advance from the Cooperative College in the United Kingdom, and with the great support of the Cooperative News in the UK, who are doing this recording for me. It's all cooperation. And I'm delighted to be able to give you, if you like, a sort of run-up or run-down of what happened in the International Year of Cooperatives and the way in which the global cooperative movement is now gearing up to demonstrate that what we started in the International Year of Cooperatives in 2012 was just a start. And we have great momentum going forward through the advocacy for our blueprint for a cooperative decade. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that and why we think it's so important that you understand where the cooperative movement is going, and where you feel you can align yourself with us, please do. We look forward to working with you going forward. So the co-op movement has this greater sense of its own cohesion after the International Year. It also has a very good sense now of its own size and significance in the global market and in the global economy. Our businesses, which are owned by over 1 billion people, employ over 100 million people. We will also reveal in Cape Town are now worth $2.2 trillion in terms of turnover, and that's just the largest 300 businesses alone. $2.2 trillion, and that figure is up from last year's at just under 2 trillion. So you can see that the co-op movement throughout this crisis of financial collapse and economic recession in many parts of the world continues to grow, and this is hugely encouraging. So we're now in the stage of trying to persuade global decision makers about the diversification of the global economy, and we believe cooperatives and other member-owned businesses should be in that campaign together. And I have to tell you that it is finding resonance amongst global decision makers. So we now believe we have to continue that momentum that was built up so successfully over 2012. How are we doing it? We're doing it through putting into practice the strategy that the global movement adopted in Manchester in October last year, which is bound up around the agenda of the blueprint for a cooperative decade. And this strategy was put together not for the ICA, but for the global movement, for the enterprises and business around the world who are pursuing a cooperative model of business. And we put this together in a quite different way. The board of the ICA were comfortable that we used key people from a handful of our core businesses around the world, businesses that are not only commercially successful, whether they were large or small, but also had a proven track record of advocating the cooperative difference. So we had 4 or 5 of such people, and we said to them, what is it that your businesses, your enterprises, what is it they want to be? Where do they want to be in terms of their performance, in terms of their integration in communities in 20, 25 years' time? And from that we work backwards to what the international movement and organisations like national apexes and the International Cooperative Alliance could do to promote that vision that our enterprises themselves were seeking to drive. And we developed the blueprint for a cooperative decade in that context, through close interaction between some of the largest cooperative enterprises, most successful and most cooperative in that sense, business and enterprises, and the board of the International Cooperative Alliance. And you know, what's in the decade document, the blueprint, is not rocket science. We found consensus around 5 key themes, and we believe if these 5 key themes are taken forward across the world, then we believe that the cooperative movement will continue to grow and will meet the overall objective of being the model of enterprise most favoured by ordinary people, and therefore the most sustainable, and hence the fastest growing by 2020. That's our very ambitious, but we believe eminently achievable objective if we continue to work together in the sense that we worked together last year. So what are these 5 themes? As I say, they're not rocket science. Firstly, we have 2 key identifiers of the cooperative difference. First is participation. Those of you sitting in this meeting will know that cooperatives are amongst the most participatory form of governance in the world in terms of enterprise. We encourage people to engage, to participate. We encourage them to come into ownership, democratic ownership of the businesses. And so we believe it's time to drive that participation further, to start using the new technologies that exist, to say to the communities around the world in which the cooperatives operate, actually, you know, we want you to tell us what you think of what we're doing as cooperatives. What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? Tell us how you believe we can grow cooperative enterprises in your community. None of this takes away from the right of members of a cooperative to decide on the way forward, but that decision about how to go forward can be infused with support, advice, counsel, good or bad, accepted or not, from the community which it's serving. And we think that's a very, very exciting new agenda, to use people, particularly the young, to be coming into a symbiotic relationship with the cooperatives in their community, to drive forward knowledge of our movement, to drive forward engagement with it, and hopefully to have them thinking, actually, this sort of business is for me. This sort of enterprise could help in my community. So the first one is to drive our democratic participation to new levels and reinforce what is already recognised by most people out there when you survey them about what is the cooperative difference. Participation is regarded as our most key identifier at the moment. The second identifier is sustainability. If I'm honest with you, if you said sustainability to people in the streets, they wouldn't immediately think of cooperatives. But they should, because our forms of enterprise are the most sustainable. Written into the way in which we control and govern our enterprises is a model that says we take people's need as the core part of our economic decision making. And when you look at that in contrast to a corporation or a company whose constitutional objective is to maximise its profits to its shareholders, you can instantly see the difference between the 2 models and how cooperatives, if people stick with the cooperative governance, the principles and the ethics of our movement, will inevitably be more sustainable. Hence, we've seen over the last 5 years, cooperative financial institutions have continued to grow. Their asset base has grown, the number of depositors has grown, and they've continued to lend. They've continued to lend to individuals and to small businesses and indeed to large businesses around the world. So we know that our business inherently is more sustainable. What we need to do now is to drive that knowledge and awareness. And of course, most people now identify sustainability with the drive to protect the planet. Of course it's that, but actually we believe it's more than that. It's about sustainable industrial relations. It's about good community relations. It's about solid business ethics. It's about removing poverty from communities. It's about getting rid of tyrants and dictators through proper democratic engagement, good democratic basis, informed citizens. The cooperative movement is about all of this. So when we talk about sustainability, are talking about that very holistic approach to enterprise as well as sustainability for the planet. And there's some hugely innovative, creative and exciting cooperative sustainability projects and businesses and enterprises now operating across the world. And we want sustainability to reach the same level of recognition that participation has for our model of enterprise out there in the world. So those are the first 2. The third one is identity. I've already talked about the new cooperative mark, the identity mark that we will launch this week in Cape Town. We believe that's one part of the equation. A good, strong identity for the cooperative model of business that keeps the cohesion, drives a sense of togetherness, allows cooperators to lift their heads from looking down at their own business and see that cooperatives are already a large and vital part of the local community, the real economy that serves people's needs on the ground right across the world. What we want to do now is to make sure that we have some seriously strong messages that go out about what lies behind the identity, about the fact that we're about placing people at the centre of economic decision making, about the fact that we are a sustainable business model. These messages need to be driven into the identity that we're advocating around the world. So driving up the level of knowledge about our identity with ordinary folk around the world, as well as with decision makers, is critical for us. And one of the ways in which we tried to do this, for example, was the way in which we believe we were able to get the cooperative model of enterprise written into the Rio Plus 20 treaty that came out of Rio last year. I'm sure many of you, like me, would think that that treaty wasn't sufficiently strong in terms of protecting the environment. However, for the first time ever, by active use of our advisory role with the United Nations, by putting our policy director into the seat that we hold in the negotiations for the Rio Plus 20 for a whole week every month for 9 months, we were able to secure acknowledgement in the treaty that the cooperative model of enterprise has a role to play in the Rio Plus 20 taking forward the security of the planet in terms of job creation, in terms of sustainable agriculture, and in terms of international development. That was a huge success for the new approach we're taking to the cooperative advocacy. And it's all about our identity. So we have the two identifiers, participation, sustainability. We have the identity. And then there are two other things that are needed if cooperatives are to flourish around the world. The first is legal frameworks. We need to be sure that in every country where cooperators can make a good, proper, sound business case for a cooperative enterprise, that they should be able to have access to the market and that they shouldn't be discriminated against vis-à-vis other incorporated bodies. And in many countries now that is the case. In some countries, cooperatives may not be banks. They are sometimes not recognised as small and medium enterprises. They're somewhere off in a corner. And that has to stop. So we want every country to have good quality, enabling cooperative legislation that's fit for purpose in the 21st century. And the United Nations helped us greatly with that last year by asking all their member states to put in place good, sound cooperative law. And in India, for instance, for the first time that I know in any country, the Indian government amended its constitution to say that the right to form a cooperative is a fundamental right of an Indian citizen, man or woman. And this is hugely important, this sort of take-up for the request of the United Nations. And many countries around the world are now looking to look to their review and reform their cooperative legislation. Some have already done so in this last year. So we will continue that campaign alongside the UN to make sure that there is no discrimination. And discrimination is often in the cooperative sense, because we have such a long life, it's often a matter or an accident of history. And we need to address that and get good, strong, enabling legislation. The last of the two that we need is development capital. As you know, cooperatives and member-owned businesses often do not have, and cooperatives certainly do not have, access to the stock markets of this world. And finding development capital, both for start-up cooperatives, but also for mature cooperatives in mature economies who need substantial investment if they're going to compete in today's world. Those enterprises need to have access to development capital. And often now, the traditional way of finding cooperative capital through member funds is not enough to feed the needs of investment that are required in modern enterprise. So we have set up a blue ribbon cooperative capital group, which is being filled by a small number of people, some of the most important key financial brains in the cooperative movement around the world, to sit together and talk about how we can look at cooperative capital in a completely fresh way. And that group is meeting here this week in Cape Town in a town hall style discussion with members here who may have had that problem in their own countries of finding development capital or trying to start up new cooperatives and find capital isn't available. And of course we've started our own global development cooperative, which is designed to have to fill the missing gap in cooperative capital investment. That bit where a cooperative is already established but doesn't have the development capital to move on, to perhaps diversify its business or grow its business. Very important in the developing world in particular. So we have 2 initiatives running which we hope will help fill that gap. Of course, finding answers to cooperative capital is quite a long-term problem. And we will take our time and be cautious, because under any circumstances we must protect the rights of the member owners and not jeopardise it by inappropriate capital acquisition. And that, of course, has been a problem for some cooperatives. We will resist that and find new ways, hopefully fresh ways, in which we can find development capital. So these are our 5 blueprint themes: participation, sustainability, identity, legal frameworks, and capital. And we believe that if we start working on this together, we can make a big difference to the development of our family of enterprises around the world. And I just want to finish by saying we could not have been happier at the take-up of the blueprint. Already we have something like 24 language versions, as people around the world have translated the blueprint. We know of many governments who are now using the blueprint to focus their cooperative national policy going forward. And now domestic cooperative movements are meeting to work out how they can pursue each element of the blueprint in their country, and working often with their government or their region in that respect. So there's a great head of steam behind this now, and we hope and believe that this will help us to drive cooperative enterprise forward, and indeed member-owned business overall. This is a very important moment for alternative enterprise models. We believe that it is absolutely clear now that you can no longer depend on one dominant model of incorporation. This is the moment for all our businesses, those that are sitting in your room there in Chamonix and us here in Cape Town, to work together to drive that model forward, to give it the place in the global economy that it deserves. And from my perspective, we are insistent that the voice of the billion cooperators who've chosen to be a member of a cooperative for a variety of reasons, but basically because they themselves get something out of it, we believe that model of enterprise has to be heard by global decision makers. The days in which we were invisible because we didn't appear on the stock market have got to go, and the voice of the billion must be heard. That's our agenda, and I very much hope you will find you're able to support it. Thank you.